Hey guys, what's up? It's Susie Rune here, and I am going to go through some Frost DK talents today and explain sort of how Frost DK works and, sort of how I have my specialty set up. If you like it, go ahead and do it. If you don't like it, certainly you're free to, make those decisions on your own and completely make your own build. I encourage that. Creativity always seems to give us more options, so I'm all about that. I do a lot of PvP on this character. As you can see, I am in Gladiator gear just because I don't do a lot of PvE content on my Death Knight. So I am using a multi-purpose build here. Usually this is for PvP. It also will work well, single target and AoE in PvE. I've done both and it works really, really well. So feel free to sort of take it and make it your own. These are the talents I've picked, and here's sort of why. So the first thing is you can see all the talents that are highlighted here. I have picked 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, then 1 and 3 in this tier because I'm using a legendary that allows me to have 2 out of 3 talents, and then 1 in the last tree for Obliteration. The reason why is because there's a nice synergy here between all of these talents, and also because of the abilities that I have in the gear that I'm using. It's going to be a different situation for everyone, but I think that this talent tree, the way it's set up, is definitely a good talent tree, a good jumping off point for anybody in any type of gear. Again, I'm not super high eye level or anything like that, and it does pretty good damage, and you also have the ability to do a lot of AoE damage, which is also a bonus, as well as high single target. So it's a very good balanced build. I'm going to go through these tiers and just talk about the talents and why I've picked them. First of all, I want to point out which ones are strong and which ones are sort of not so good. So in the first tree, none of them are really terrible. Icy Talons and Shattering Strikes are probably the top 2. Frost Talents, the Icy Talons is very good if you need to do a single target damage because of a haste buff that will stack. I've used it, and situationally it is good, so I will spec in and out of this talent if need be, because of the haste buff that you get and how it sort of improves your overall melee. In the second tier, so I've used Shattering Strikes here, by the way, in this one, and that's 5 stacks of Razor Ice on the target. Frost Strike will consume them and deal 60% additional damage. I like this particular talent because I do use this build again for PvP, and it provides some additional burst that I find very helpful. Another thing that I want to show you is that the enchants that go on your weapons should be Fallen Crusader on your main hand and Razor Ice on your offhand. Now, I'm not an expert, so by all means, try to experiment and do your own thing. That's just what I've read as far as like min-max and what you should use. I find it to be pretty efficient, so stick with that. If you believe in it, I think it works great. I've tested it, I've ran the numbers, and it runs really well. Murderous Efficiency. This is the second tier. Consuming the Killing Machine effect has a 50% chance to cause you to gain a rune, which basically gives you the ability to attack with something else that's even, harder. So that does more damage. So Freezing Fog is this close second here. Horn of Winter used to be good, and I think maybe situationally it probably still is. But the problem is that Murderous Efficiency is so good and Killing Machine procs so often that it makes it sort of a clear winner here. I would put Freezing Fog over Horn of Winter. Actually, Freezing Fog can be good for some increased AoE damage if you're into it. I don't tend to go with Freezing Fog because I have other ice effects that we'll get into later, including Winter is Coming, that pairs well with Remorseless Winter, that I find to be a little bit more valuable. So Killing Machine buff here and Murderous Efficiency seems to do really well, especially again with the burst. So when you're pairing these burst abilities up, you can just about level somebody in a few hits, and it's really nice, or a mob, what have you. Ice Cap, sort of an unsuspecting choice here. A lot of people choose Avalanche. Avalanche is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, this is one of those tiers where it's sort of situational. Glacial Advance is also fun just to sort of get things away from you. All again situational. Avalanche is probably a good, all around as well, especially if you're using this for PvP. I'm using Ice Cap here because Frost Scythe and Obliterate critical strikes reduce the remaining cooldown of Pillar of Frost. Now, what Pillar of Frost is it's this ability here. And if you look up at the top, the description, the power of Frost increases your strength by 20% and grants immunity to external movement effects such as knockbacks. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what that means is that it is a buff to your overall damage output because of your strength, and also a good way to sort of ignore CCs and things of that nature, which is helpful in PvE and PvP, but mostly PvP. So if you can, and then you can see that this is a 1 minute cooldown, right? So it's already a short cooldown, 60 seconds we're talking here, and with the Pillar of Frost, you're decreasing that a little bit. Anytime your Frost Strike, Frost Scythe, and Obliterate critical strike, they'll reduce the cooldown of Pillar of Frost. So again, these talents all sort of synergize. If you can see how they all sort of link, one leads to the next. That's sort of what we're going for here. Which brings us to our next piece. This one is Winter is Coming. An enemy is struck 5 times by Remorseless Winter while your Pillar of Frost is active, are stunned for 4 seconds. Now this is good for PvE, just to if you're in the bunch in the middle of mobs, because basically Remorseless Winter will also do damage. So while they're being stuck into this sort of like blizzard that you've created and being stunned, they're also being damaged. So it's a good AoE attack, and it pairs well with Howling Blast, which is also sort of your AoE, Frost Fever, your a lot of times your opener. And that also goes well and synergizes with some of the honor talents that we have later. And I'll skip over here and just show you real quick, which is Frozen Sinner. And your Remorseless Winter also freezes all targets within 10 yards, rooting them in place for 4 seconds when cast. Which means that everything around you, if you're in a group of people, is now stuck in the ground and either has to trinket and run, because you're going to be using Frost Scythe on them, which is a sweeping attack that strikes all enemies in front of you for quite a bit of damage, and also synergizes with Murderous Efficiency and Shattering Strikes and Ice Cap. I mean, it's just everything is just, you're just trucking dudes. You're just trucking groups, just trucking. And it's really good. Now, back to this Winter is Coming here. Blinding Sleet and Abomination's Might. Again, situational. This is like a mass sort of blind, which is its own CC in its own right. So either way you're looking at CC, I just like the idea of being able to CC something while it's being damaged. And then Abomination's Might. Critical strikes have a 20% chance to drive lesser enemies to the ground. It's okay. It's a stun. It's sort of a CC, but it's a little bit more specific and situational. Winter's Coming is a much better synergy with Remorseless Winter, and again with the honor talent that I've chosen, the Frozen Sinner. So I definitely like the way that those work together. Next tier down here. The Inexorable, Assault, and Permafrost. These three are actually very good talents altogether. Inexorable Assault. While in combat with no enemy within 8 yards, you gain Inexorable Assault every 1 second. Each stack causes your next auto attack to deal 76,126 additional frost damage. Now, what that means is that if you're at a distance from someone and you're not in combat, and let's say you chains of ice, or let's say you hit him with a Howling Blast, as long as you're far enough away from 8 yards, every second that you're further away than the 8 yards, you're stacking a buff on yourself. And then when you get to them, your first auto attack is going to womp on them. So I like to use this as a situational thing, and this can be used in arena for people that are like trying to hide behind pillars. If you can hit them with a Chains of Ice or a Howling Blast, and if they want to still run sort of away from you or try to stay away, if you're using this, you're gaining basically an attack ability that's buffing you, and then when you get to them and you hit them, it's going to be it's going to hurt harder. At least your what I like to call white damage, which is just your normal auto attack. It'll hurt pretty bad. So volatile shielding, also very good. Here's the thing about this talent. Your anti-magic shell absorbs 35% more damage and generates 100% additional runic power. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but Anti-Magic Shell is good for your normal rotation. You need to be using this all the time, anytime it's on cooldown, basically. The reason why isn't because it's just a defensive, sort of bubble, okay, for magic damage. Now, it is good for that. A lot of people realize that. I'm sure everyone knows that that's sort of what this ability is based around. But what they don't know is that it also does damage because it's absorbing runic power. So when you pop the bubble, any damage that you absorb generates more runic power for you to use, which is an increase in damage output because you're able to use your abilities more often. A lot of folks don't realize that it does that, but it does, and it should be part of your normal rotation. So knowing that, these 3 talents are all very good, but Permafrost is what I'm using right now, just to get an absorb shield equal to 100% of the damage that I deal. Makes you a little bit tankier in PvP, okay? And it makes you a little bit more tanky in PvE. So PvP and PvE, it's a good talent, probably more valuable in PvP, which is why it's chosen here. Anyway, next tier. Frost Scythe, basically you're just mowing dudes down. Just mowing them. That's what this is for. Just to mow them up. Just like a wheat field, taking them down. Gathering Storm. This one is one that synergizes with Winter is Coming and Remorseless Winter. So that's the pick here. This is only being used for PvE, though, because in PvP I'm spec'd Frost Scythe. Again, I only get to pick 2 here because of the legendary ring that I'm using, but that's just sort of my choice. Frozen Pulse is okay. While you have fewer than 2 full runes, your auto attacks radiate intense cold, inflicting frost damage on all nearby enemies. So a little bit more of an AoE, and it's just, but the output just isn't there. 30,000 damage, it's not a lot, you know what I mean? But it is passive, so there's no real thinking to it or anything like that. But out of these 3 talents, I think if you have the legendary that I'm using, you pick 3 in 1 here. It's sort of the clear, victor. Final tier, I'm using Obliteration. So this tier is where it gets a little tricky. Hungering Rune weapon is also very good. But for this build and the way that the synergy is set up with everything else, Obliterate's definitely the better one to use here for me. And it also has a shorter cooldown, so I'm able to use it more often. That's really the deciding factor here. So Obliteration, for the next 10 seconds, Frost Strike and Howling Blast grant Killing Machine, and Obliterate cost 1 less rune. So you're conserving your runes, and you are able to proc your Killing Machine by using Frost Strike and Howling Blast, which equals more Obliterates. So it's just better overall single target damage. But Breath of Sindragosa is something that's a more situational. It could be a fun PvP sort of thing to use, and definitely is a good, damage dealer as well, because it does do a good amount of damage, but it's more of a single area, whereas this, I can just pop it whenever I want. It's instant. They both are, but again, the clear deciding factor here is really the cooldown and sort of the resources required to do so. Hungry Rune Weapon, I didn't really get into it. This is a very good one as well. It does have a 3-minute cooldown, so it is a little longer, but it's a good PvE talent as well. It empowers your Rune Weapon, gaining 1 rune and 5 runic power instantly, and every 1.5 seconds, and granting 20% haste for 12 seconds. So you get a lot of resources back using this and are able to deal quite a bit of damage, and also getting a nice little haste buff, which would go nice with Icy Talons. So if you're looking for some synergy, here and here are some good resources. Icy Talons with Hungering Rune Weapon would work very well. So that is my build and sort of how that works. It's got some good survivability. That's the fun thing about Frost. It does have some decent survivability. You have good control over your opponents and the ability to sort of get around quite easy. So let's get into the honor talents here that I've chosen. Now I'm using adaptation, and really the only reason why is just because I've been lazy. But normally I would be using Gladiator's Medallion here. I just haven't right now. For whatever reason, I'm using adaptation, probably because I was doing BGs and there's 1,000 people trying to CC everything. But that is definitely probably the best. The Gladiator Medallion is probably the best for you being able to choose when to sort of get out of those situations. Second tier, either Hardiness, Reinforced Armor, or Sparring. I'm using Sparring because I was doing BGs and seemed to run into a few cleave teams running around out there, and this helps with the melee damage by with the warriors and other melee classes coming after you. It blunts the attack, and it makes it so that you're dealing 50% reduced damage against those classes, so it's good survivability there. Normally a good all around would be health increased by 10%, which is Reinforced Armor. So Sparring is more situational. I'm using it just because I was doing BGs, and it tends to work a little better there for me. Hardiness, this is okay. All three of these are sort of just I change these often, and I change these from time to time. I very rarely use Relentless, but Adaptation and Gladiator's Medallion I'll switch off and on from time to time. And then down here, AMZ is probably the better talent to choose here. And what this does is it allows you to make a zone for 10 seconds that reduces spell damage taken by party or raid members by 60%. So if you're standing in it or they're standing in it, they're taking less damage from casters. And that's sort of what that is it's a retreat from that. Dark Simulacrum is okay. I don't use it. This would be more situational for, like, say, Arena, and using that on sort of for casters. But Anti-Magic Zone, I think, is probably the better choice. Cadaverous Pallor is okay. What this does is it basically will take every once in a while it'll take a spell cast on you, and it converts it into a disease. Instead of being hit all at once, it disperses it, sort of like a Monk's Stagger will do. Instead of you taking the brunt of it all at once and hitting yourself for the full damage, it'll convert it into a disease that will basically tick on you instead of hit you for a million health. What'll end up happening is it'll hit you with a total of 1 million, but you'll get it dealt to you over the period of time, which gives a caster that is like a healer, like a priest or a paladin, time to cleanse you, and you don't have to take that damage. So that's helpful at times, but AMZ is probably the better choice here. The auras, completely situational, totally up to you. Heartstop aura is good, especially if you're trying to pursue, say, like a flag-carrying druid or something like that. It decreases the cooldown recovery rate of the abilities by 20% to all enemies within 5 yards. So, like, anytime, like, they're trying to get away from you, like those mobility type things, it'll slow down cooldowns. And also, obviously because it's slowing that stuff down, they're not able to use their abilities as quickly, so that helps as well. Decomposing Aura. All enemies within 10 yards slowly decay. Basically, 3% of their max health every 2 seconds. It will stack up to 5 times. It can do a little bit of damage if if everyone's in a group, but I choose to go with Necrotic Aura. Now, here's the reason why. All enemies within 12 yards take 8% increase in magic damage. So, a lot of the Death Knight's abilities, believe it or not, although they do appear to be melee, are magic based. So it's also increasing the damage that you're doing, as well as any casters or any other Death Knights, any other type of like magical attack that's occurring. So it's a good support mechanism, and it's also a good buff to your damage. That's the reason why I use Necrotic Aura. Frozen Center. Okay. Frozen Center. Your Remorseless Winter also freezes all targets within 10 yards, rooting them in place for 4 seconds when cast. And then Delirium, your Howling Blast and Frost Strike apply Delirium to the target, and Delirium is a disease, and it will debilitate their movements, reducing cooldown recovery rate of movement, enhancing ability. So again, another one that would be good with like a flag-carrying druid or someone that's trying to retreat get away from you with a flag or something like that. It would help sort of slow them down. But this is the one ability we talked about earlier that synergizes well with Remorseless Winter, and so that's why that's chosen in this category. Death Chill. This is a fun one to control mobs, or not mobs, but players with. Basically what this does is when you when you death grip something, it will automatically chains of ice them, so you don't have to do it separately. What happens is if you death grip them and then chains of ice them anyway, is it will root them in place. It embeds them into the ground into a block of ice, and they can't move. So this is a really good ability to make like a pally, pop his bubble if you want to death grip them and then chains of ice them and then start whomping on them, hitting them with Obliterate. They're probably going to pop a bubble to try to get out. So it's a good way to sort of scare your opponent into sort of blowing their cooldown, but also a good way to sort of control mobs that are retreating and trying to get away from you as well. So these are all sort of about controlling movement of others, and Frozen Center is really no different. It will root everyone in place though, instead of just say one person, or slow down a movement enhancing ability. So that's why I chose this. And also Remorseless Winter does damage, so you're doing constant damage while you're keeping them in place, and that's why I like that one. And then Overpowered Rune Weapon. This one I use because it empowers your rune weapons cooldown, and by reducing it by 2 minutes. So instead of having a longer cooldown, you have a shorter cooldown. Pretty straightforward. Chill Streak deals 3% of the target's total health and frost damage, and reduces their movement speed by 70% for 4 seconds. This is also good. Another movement controlling ability. It will bounce up to 9 times between closest targets. So these are all the bottom tier is good. I just chose to go with a more damage ability, just because of the fact that it synergizes well with what I have, and I like to have damage cooldowns, and survivability isn't a problem really. So Tundra Stalker though, we'll get in. Let's cover this tooltip. It's a damage of your frost strike is increased by 15% on snared targets, and critical strike chance increased by 50% on rooted targets. This isn't bad, except for really the only thing that you would have to have your targets all rooted before this actually would take place. So otherwise it's just sort of a passive useless ability unless they're already rooted. This is a passive ability that's always available, that's being used at all times. So that's one of the reasons why I chose that one, just because it doesn't require a button press, and it's good all the time. So it has 100% uptime. So that is the honor talents. These are the talents that I've chosen for this Death Knight. And let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to please like the video actually, by clicking the like button down below. And follow us on Twitter at ILaggedOut. And or you can find me on. I do have an Xbox Live gamer tag. It's ifrag79, and you can also check out our website www.namelessgamerspdx.com. Thanks for watching.